Well, hello there, everybody. You're watching the SMC Journal podcast, where it's all about performance in IT today. I'm Scott Moore, your host. Let's go ahead and get right into it. You may remember a few episodes ago, I had an interview with a company called Stormforge. And since that time, in fact, yesterday, Stormforge made a major announcement and put out a press release. And I read it. And it said, their new product, Stormforge Optimize, and there's a link out there on our show notes to the product page for this new product. The press release said it uses machine learning to intelligently and automatically improve application performance and efficiency, cost efficiency in cloud native production environments, meaning Kubernetes deployed applications. And I keyed in on the word automatically. What does that mean? Of course, I've got questions about that. So in order to get those answered, we're going to bring in the source, the CEO, Matt Provo of Stormforge. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the SMC Journal podcast.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Happy to be here.
Well, I just want to say thank you for supporting this podcast and the performance community. I'm announcing right now that Stormforge is a brand new sponsor of the SMC Journal, and we really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad we could make it happen. Excited about what you're up to.
So I had an interview with Erwin Daria a few episodes ago, and it was very enlightening. This was the first I had heard of Stormforge. Why don't you introduce yourself and your company, Stormforge?
Yeah, absolutely. Stormforge, I founded Stormforge in 2016. So been around since then. We operated as a lab really for the first couple years, trying to figure out how to take real technology and connect it to a set of problems in a market that was growing. And we've always been our core competency has always been around machine learning. And as we were building out our core pieces from a machine learning standpoint, historically we were a Docker Swarm shop, and like many, we lifted and shifted to Kubernetes, and it was in that lift and shift that we found the set of problems around tuning resources in a Kubernetes application environment that are both incredibly painful and manual, and yet connected to a whole bunch of value. And so the company's been growing nicely over the past number of years. Raised just over 70 million in funding at this point, operating across North America. We've got an office in Germany. We operate in APAC, and so we have a lot of fun. It's a startup, but one that has a deep commitment to not only our core values, but really providing ongoing value for our users as we scale our solutions and scale the company.
You definitely have a lot going on, and you just made another big announcement yesterday. You had a press release. I read it. I want to go into that. You have this new solution that you say closes the loop between pre production and production optimization. Tell me what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So, historically and rightfully, as a machine learning focused solution, we're data dependent. So, garbage in, garbage out. And so, we have been taking load and performance tests as our kind of single threaded data input for a while now. And and that's really what feeds the optimization engine, if you will. It's in a pre-production environment, and users find just a ton of value out of it. We've got our own performance testing solution, but we also have integrations with all the major performance testing and load testing solutions out there. And what we found as users were engaging with Stormforge is they would find a lot of value for about 10 to 20% of the applications in their ecosystem. And so we started asking the question, what about the remaining 70%? And a lot of the feedback was around you need to have multiple data inputs, and you need to be able to provide optimization capabilities that are in both pre-production as well as production. And so one piece of clarity I really like to make is we are not live tuning in production. So that's one real important piece. We're taking now telemetry and observability data as kind of our second point of entry. And we're using that data to be able to make recommendations in a production environment that typically are going up against the VPA or the HPA in a Kubernetes world. And so we've been working on this part of the platform for about a year and a half now. Got a lot of amazing design partners and beta testers, and we're ready. We've launched this thing formally out into the wild, and super excited about that. And so when we say closing the loop, we shouldn't decide for the user how they want to engage with our technology. We shouldn't decide for the user in what part of the CI/CD process do they want to engage with us. We should give them intuitive and intelligent options across the full spectrum that integrate nicely into the tool chain for the cloud native tool chain that's already hardening, and that's what we've done.
So this is really a hot topic because I mentioned that earlier interview that I did with Erwin, because as I was searching through how to make Kubernetes the most efficient it can be from like an infrastructure perspective, your company kept coming up, and there was a report that you have mentioned and I've seen from the CNCF about how there's this divide growing between the finance group and DevOps
Yep.
team developers, where the cloud bills are higher than it was they expected it to be. It's caused a little bit, why are we spending so much? Well, part of that is the developers are saying it's pretty complex, and we can't figure out just out of the gate how to tune Kubernetes. We don't want to give them too minimal of resources, because then
Yep.
you're going to have a failure. We don't want that, so that's very expensive. So we are spending a little bit more because we want to be conservative on the sizing. But my question is, do you think that the reason why it's so hard is just because Kubernetes brings with it so much complexity, and there's not a good way maybe until now to optimize it until you get out there and look at it and see all this data? Or is it that we don't have the skill sets right now in place for the people who are, because it's being deployed so rapidly everywhere, it's being adopted so quickly?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I talk about, I'll answer in a couple different ways. So organizations obviously move workloads over to Kubernetes, whether in pre-prod or production, for a series of pretty consistent reasons, honestly, for, application portability, stability, and that initial flexibility that you're talking about. So within Kubernetes, there's obviously many knobs that can be turned, and developers, in many ways, love it, at least out of the gate. Alongside that, we find there is typically a promise of a cloud efficiency, if you will, that come with the lift and shift to Kubernetes. But what we find often is that promise of flexibility downstream, day two forward, often and almost always results in getting smacked in the face with just a bunch of complexity. And so while I have a lot more while I have many new knobs to turn, I don't know their impact. I don't know application by application or team by team. If I make some shifts and changes over here, how does that impact the worldview of that application or that environment over here? And so there's this complexity gap that gets created, and developers are often uh, left to do one of two things. One, either manually tune their applications with some sort of requirement to trade off between cost and performance in many cases, or to take out of the box recommendations that might ship with the databases or whatever they're using from a configuration standpoint. And so our charge is to take that completely out of the equation. They shouldn't have to choose. You should not have to choose between cost and performance. You should not have to choose between the business objectives and targets, and you should still be able to meet your SLAs and your SLOs when managing these applications. But I will add, and you hit it spot on, there is a massive skills gap in the cloud native world. Kubernetes only being 5 or so years old, the same humans who were responsible for managing these applications in a pre cloud native, pre Kubernetes, pre containers world are often the same ones responsible for it now. And so there's a lot of organizations that I have a ton of respect for, who are addressing this skills gap with training. But I think when you step back, it's all of those things you mentioned in conjunction with one another, not in a static way, right? Software is not static, and so release over release, you're coming up against some of these same challenges as you operationalize, kind of go day two forward.
So going back to what you said earlier, that you're not making changes in production like without any
Yeah,
permissions or anything like that, which is it's good to
yeah,
state that. But when we you just got done talking about how complex it is and how the skill sets are
yep,
needed, so obviously we know people are generally lazy. If you've got a complex thing that you've got to and you need a solution, hey, fix it for me. If you
yep,
can fix it for me, give me a easy button, right?
yep,
So when we
yeah.
talk about automated optimization or the optimization that you might be doing, what does that really mean? Can you state it again? Like you're saying you're not doing it, but could we actually get to a place where we've trusted the software enough for it to make
Yeah.
the changes it needs to make on the fly?
Yeah, I think technique-wise, from a machine learning standpoint, there's certainly different approaches to kind of getting to this sort of ideal or end state. Call it set and forget, call it whatever. Full end-to-end automation, whatever you want to call it. Our view is that humans should be empowered into the process, not automated out of it. And so, we do believe in what I call, or the industry calls, human augmented AI. And so we do provide the user an end-to-end capability should they want to automatically deploy the recommendations we're making continuously in production. But they certainly do not have to take that step, and many don't. And what we find is that we give you the capability to set those thresholds and kind of your risk tolerance by application that you're comfortable with. And over time, as the user sees the product work and deliver the appropriate results, they trust it. And typically, we're looking at a situation where it's 80 to 90% set and forget and automated, and ultimately is deployed automatically from a recommendation standpoint. And so we do see a lot of that, but we want them to still be involved to a certain degree. We don't want them going through all the steps to manually tune. We want them to be involved to say, I continue to see the value here. I continue to believe in the recommendations that are being given back, and I'm increasingly more comfortable with them.
Let's talk about those recommendations because
Yep.
I've had some conversations, just off the cuff conversations with some of my fellow performance engineers, and one of the things when it comes to machine learning and making things better over time automatically, a lot of them are like, I would just like to have a rules based engine based on
Yeah.
the things that are best practices for my company, my application, and let us keep tweaking those things so that it gets faster and faster and make it very flexible and easy to do that. And I'm reading in your press release about you have these configurable policies. Is
Mhm.
that what this is, or are these custom driven rule sets for continuous optimization? How does that all work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, what we're doing is we are enabling recommendations by the system, and they are connected to a set of policies, or call them thresholds, that you're comfortable with for any given application. So this might be something like a min and a max for CPU and memory. So think of them as guardrails. And so what we're saying within those guardrails is when the machine learning comes back with a recommendation that fits within these guardrails, how comfortable am I with that recommendation automatically being deployed across what time frame, and sort of across what part of the application or the infrastructure itself. And so we're our users are focused on things like managing risk of CPU throttling or out of memory errors, or some of these areas within their application that do connect really nicely to a policy that is then connected to an SLA or an SLO, or a business objective. And so within those sort of thresholds, if you will, the AI is taught to develop patterns, and those patterns essentially, you wouldn't be totally inaccurate to call them rules. They are definitely intelligent, and we will end up providing typically a series of recommendations across a fixed period of time according to the business objectives. And so it's but we kind of the policy piece is stay within this threshold, and the user decides how what level of risk they're comfortable with.
Where I think this has the most promise is where maybe I am very familiar with my application technically and I know some things that already need to be tweaked or
Yep.
watched for. But then I think the AI component looks at relationships that we wouldn't typically think and kind of maps out because it has a much broader scope of view and more details. And then it turns back and says, here's the things you haven't thought of. Here are some other things that will help give you most bang for the buck. And I think that's the piece that's really missing right now.
We call that we believe wholeheartedly that Stormforge should remain application agnostic. We believe the end user knows their application, they know the business objectives. We need to be able to provide value continuously within that world and that environment. I like what you said a lot, and it's definitely true. We call that the parameter space. So as the number of metrics or number of parameters that we're looking at within that application ecosystem expands, the more possible combinations there are in how you could tune the application. So when you start with a memory and a CPU, on any given, with any given application, there's typically about 100 different possible combinations at any given time that you might be able to put together to provide the right tune of the application. When you go to five, there's over a million. And when you go above 10 parameters, there's over a billion. And that's just statically, much less dynamically. This problem is not solvable by any human. It is the perfect problem to be solved by AI, and so that's that worldview of optimization and resource efficiency gets just expanded greatly by working with Stormforge.
That's actually a good segue into the last question I had, which is on observability, because you talk about a lot of data, and let's.
Yeah.
I always say let the machine solve the machine's problem because there's so much data that now it's being gathered through
Yep.
observability tools. Yeah, you can pick the needle out of the haystack, but you got a lot of stuff you got to sift through to find that, and humans aren't going to be
Yep.
able to do that easily. So, but when we talk about observability, the big thing that keeps popping up is actionable insights. In other words, things that are actionable you can do and that reflect how you can better your business ultimately. So tying it to the
Yep.
business. So in your announcement, you talk about observability data providing actionable insights. Can you elaborate on that and what type of insights can you give teams that they could not get from an observability platform on their own?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So we we've never intended, and we won't likely ever build our own observability piece. There's amazing organizations out there today already. We intend and have partnered very closely and integrated. Uh, with that said, observability and APM, while growing, and you're exactly right, the amount of data that's available is only increasing. But there's this gap between data and value, and part of that is connected to uh, the reactive versus proactive nature. Uh, APM observability tells me what happened. It gives me insight or visualization, or it tells me what occurred. That occurrence already took place. Where we come in is proactively using that as an input to say historically, what does this look like, and what does it look like right this moment, and can we very quickly and proactively anticipate what's coming in the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, hour for that application. And so that's really where we come in and tie nicely those insights around, and they are tied really closely to resource efficiency, application performance, stability, and cost. And when we're able to do that proactively and semi-automatically, it allows the user to get a bunch more value around the resources that they're consuming by application, how that maps to the budget that they've put in place for that application. It allows them to have predictive insights into where there might be upcoming problems from a resource standpoint. They may be able to see, I'm going to have some serious throttling from a CPU standpoint coming up in 5-10 minutes. uh, I'm going to take a recommendation from Stormforge to make this change. It would come back and give insight around policy changes at scale that might need to be changed for that application, and give recommendations for that. And then it's of course going to say, um, based on the metrics you care about for this application, and that you're observing or you're visualizing, how can you be more intelligent, proactive, and ultimately performant within those thresholds.
Sounds to me like the world of Kubernetes is about to get very interesting when you can start making these kind of optimizations and making it perform right out of the gate much better. So this is great. We're going to be following this, and I'm going to encourage people. We'll share in the show notes links where they can get to Stormforge and this announcement and check out the new product. And I'm excited for you. And again, thank you, Matt, for being on the show, and thanks for being a sponsor of the SMC Journal.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you. So something to keep in context here is that Stormforge is focused primarily on Kubernetes deployed applications. And so that kind of limits their scope of where they're being used at today. It doesn't mean that they won't expand in the future. The other thing to note is that they do have their own performance test or load testing solution that works hand in hand with their other products, including this one. So while they can integrate with other products as well, they do have it natively available. And then, as you mentioned, as he mentioned, this new product here is more about making these recommendations, but not automatically fixing them, automatically tuning them without any oversight. And I like the idea of him discussing this as human augmented AI. Will we ever get to the place where everything can just take care of itself? I believe we're headed in that direction. I don't know how long it would take to get there, but I'd like to know what you think about that. You can always reach me at scottmoore.consulting. There's links to my Twitter handle, Load Tester, and my LinkedIn profile. You can also reach me at help@scottmoore.consulting. Have you subscribed to our YouTube channel? If you haven't, it would do us a tremendous favor by subscribing and liking the content. You can also leave messages on those videos. You can look at the show notes of our videos on YouTube as well as smcjournal.com. As we have mentioned a couple of times, Stormforge is actually a sponsor of the show now. Stormforge is automatic Kubernetes resource management at scale, and their platform focuses on AI-powered software designed to help DevOps teams release with confidence, help IT leaders realize the promise of cloud native, faster innovation, higher quality, higher resiliency, and scalability with efficiency built in. Our show is also sponsored by Micro Focus, makers of LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise, and Cloud. Performance definitely matters. I've been using Micro Focus LoadRunner since it was Mercury LoadRunner for over 25 years, and I've done a lot of projects with a lot of protocols with this tool. It still works great. So you can check them out at microfocus.com and join their community at community.microfocus.com. Look for links in our show notes for that as well. So with that, I'd like to hear your feedback on the show in general. What do you think about this Stormforge solution? Definitely check them out and get back with me. For now, this is Scott Moore signing off for the SMC Journal podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.